Redeemed, redeemed, redeemed by the blood of the Lamb. Redeemed, redeemed, his child and full.
John chapter 5, starting with verse 1 and going through verse 9. I'm going to read it to you from the translation that I put together. Then we're going to talk about it. After this, there immediately was a feast out of the Jewish nation, and he went up, Jesus, into Jerusalem. There is continually in the Jerusalem at the sheep gate a pool, the one being called Hebraistically Bethesda, having 5 porches. Within these he had been laying, many of them being sick, blind, lame, and withered. Indeed, an angel during a season had come down in the pool and physically stirred the water. Therefore the first one entering after the stirring of the water had become well from whatever disease he had been held by at that time. And Jesus, having seen this man lying and having known that much time already he had been thus, he says to him, "Do you want to be whole?" The one being ill answered him, "Sir, a man I do not have, that when the water has been troubled, he could have put me into the pool. But in that I am continually coming, another before me continually goes down." And Jesus said to him, "You must arise, you must take up your mat, and you must walk about." And at once the man became healthy and whole, and took up the mat of him, and was walking about. And it was the Sabbath on that day. I don't know what ministry is to you, but if it's not about people other than yourself, then you got a problem. People who serve themselves are not serving Jesus. People who serve others are serving Jesus. Now, Jesus begins this, but let's go back for a minute and think about what has happened and where Jesus has come from. Jesus had gone from his first Passover in Jerusalem through Samaria and met the woman at the well. He spent a few days with those that inquired about his message to the woman at the well, who were from the city of Sychar, and he created the first community of believers there at Sychar because of the woman at the well. And he taught and preached the word at their request, staying for a few extra days. Afterward, he moved to Galilee, going back to Cana, the city where he had done his first miracle of turning the water into wine. When he was there, a nobleman came 2 days' journey from Capernaum to request Jesus that he would come down to the bedside of his son, who was dying of a fever. And instead of going, Jesus healed the young boy and told the nobleman to return. He said, "Go back to your son." And when he went back, because of the circumstances of the events, once he knew them all, he led his whole household to Jesus. Now, all of this chronology suggests that there was a short time between the Passover that Jesus celebrated in John chapter 2, verse 13, and the current feast out of the Jews. But there's no evidence that it was a short time. The least amount of time it could have been was 6 months. Just doesn't seem so in the verse. Many people believe that this was the Feast of Tabernacles, but if it was the Feast of Tabernacles, Jesus would have missed the Festival of Trumpets and the Day of Atonement. Not likely. Not likely at all. It seems more appropriate that this was the Feast of Tabernacles, just before the Day of Atonement, that he was back in Jerusalem, because the Feast of Tabernacles follows the Day of Atonement, which follows the Feast of Trumpets. So probably the Feast of Trumpets is when it was. The Day of Atonement would follow, and then the Feast of Tabernacles would follow that. Jesus is not in a booth anywhere. He's out walking about, making things better for people. So it makes more sense to me that it was probably the Feast of Trumpets, which was a time of thanksgiving, a time for joy in Jerusalem. People giving thanks to God. And that fits into what happens at the pool, Bethesda. The first Passover and the Festival of Trumpets are, like I said, 6 months apart. And it's the only festival that comes after the Passover. But all that aside, it doesn't make any difference when it was. Let's just deal with the text. It says, after this, there immediately was a feast out of the Jewish nation, and he went up, Jesus, to Jerusalem, into Jerusalem. So Jesus is headed back to celebrate a festival, and he goes into Jerusalem to do it. And when he enters Jerusalem, he comes into Jerusalem from the north. If you've got a map in the back of your Bibles that shows you how the Temple Mount was laid out, the pool of Bethesda is on the north side of the Temple Mount. So he had to come in through the north. And he passes by the pool of Bethesda, knowing that that was the way he was supposed to go, because that was where his next ministry stop would be. To minister to a man without hope. That's what we end up doing. Sometimes we end up ministering to people that have no hope. And it says, there was continually in Jerusalem at the sheep gate a pool, the one being called Hebraistically Bethesda, having 5 porches. Now there's some interesting words here. First of all, the word for gate, probatiki, and it literally means a gate through which sheep are led into Jerusalem's market. That's interesting, isn't it? It's a gate through which the sheep go. So what happens to the guy once he gets healed is he walks through this same gate to go into the Temple Mount. So one who now believes in Jesus becomes a sheep, and he walks through the sheep gate to go to the temple to offer praise and joy at the Feast of Trumpets for being whole again. The word pool, strange word, it means a place to dive into. The Greek word for bathing and swimming. This pool, if you look on any of your maps or any pictures of the pool of Bethesda, you'll see a picture. Bethesda literally means the house of kindness and mercy. Interesting thought. The sheep at the pool for cleansing, in the house of kindness and mercy. The word porches is the word stoas. Stoas, if you look it up, comes from a root word that means to stand. So if I'm just standing here, I'm stoa. You ever heard somebody say, "They look stoic"? They're just standing there. That's what the word stoic means. So you understand the word stoa does not necessarily mean porches. It could mean just columns. 5 columns. And if you look at the pictures, you will see picture after picture of buildings that have 4 sides, but none that have 5 porches, none that have 5 stoas. Interesting theology is presented in this verse. Just think about this. He says, there will continually be within thee, Jerusalem, a sheep gate, a gate for the sheep of God's flock, at the pool of mercy and kindness of God, through which the sheep of his flock pass, having 5 porches or having 5 columns. Now, if you think about how the Old Testament tabernacle was built, there were 5 columns at the tabernacle. It's all laid out in the book of Leviticus. The 5 columns stood for the Torah: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, which meant there were 4 openings between the stoas, which are Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. The only way you can enter through the law is through the gospel. It's an exact replica of the entrance of the temple in the wilderness and the temples of Solomon and Hezekiah. But you will not find this in any pictures that are drawn of the pool of Bethesda. None of them show 5 stoas at all. Jesus went into Jerusalem coming from the northern entrance by the pool of Bethesda, possibly at the Feast of Trumpets, to celebrate Thanksgiving to God. And he has to enter through or go past this pool of mercy and kindness, which is what he does. He stops to have mercy and kindness upon a man who's been there. And it says in the next verse, within these, he had been laying, many of them, sick, blind, lame, and withered. Now, the word he had been laying is an amazing Greek verb that tells the whole action all wound up in one verb. The verb really says that the man was laying there, that he was sick, that he was there as one who had received some sort of action into himself, this disease. This disease had overcome him. And he was actively involved in this pathetic situation. You can actively lay somewhere. If you make a choice to lay down in a pew, you actively do that. This man had actively gone there every day. From where, we don't know. Where he went to, we don't know. But he had been laying there at the pool, and it says there were many others. Many. The word is plethora in Greek. What's a plethora? That's a whole lot of people. And all of them were sick. Why would all these people be laying in a pool sick? That's got to be a reason. Some blind, some lame, some withered. And he says, somebody always gets to the pool before me is made well. So what makes the whole thing work the way it does? There has to be an explanation. In most texts, verse 4 is not there.